Hello, good afternoon. My name is Jim Nemetz. I'm going to discuss with you a famous breach from 2017 and to try to make sense of all the issues surrounding this breach. I'm trying to place the all the different specific items, the problems with the breach, into the NIST CyberSecurity framework functional areas to try to see where the fails or the problems were. Just a very brief little bit about myself. I am here on leave. I work for the U.S. Army CERT in Germany. I'm here on leave at my own expense for this talk. Been doing in IT security for about 20 years. I spent about 2 years in the IT field and then got into security, and I'm former law enforcement. So in addition to the previous thing that says all my comments are myself, I have to put this in my slide. My PAO guys told me I had to put this in my slide. So this is not the government's or the Army, U.S. Army's views. These are my views. So I gave this talk at a closed conference a couple of months ago, and I realized I didn't get to all the parts on what the attackers did. I went over all, so it was like my fail. I didn't really get to all the juicy details, so I'm going to put all the attackers' actions up front. So they gained remote code execution on an internet-facing web application. They installed lots, way too many web shells, and we can kind of talk about. I mean, there's theories on why so many web shells were installed. Like maybe it was like a whole bunch of people doing the thing as a group, like a group intrusion. They found plain text passwords on multiple databases. Due to lack of network segmentation, they laterally moved throughout the network. They extracted loads of PII from multiple databases, and they sucked it all down in different chunks using wget. And they were on the system for about 75 days before rampaging around, doing all this stuff, before they were detected. So here is the vulnerability they exploited, the struts vulnerability. And I just like to, it's got a score of 10, network vector, low complexity, no privileges required. Pretty bad. And here's the company we're talking about in case you didn't read the synopsis or didn't guess already. It's the Equifax breach we're talking about here. So for those of you who aren't from the U.S., Equifax is one of the major credit reporting agencies. They they record all your credit transactions, car transactions, credit card, mortgages, all that jazz, revolving credit accounts at stores, and they record all this stuff, and they give you a score for your credit worthiness when you go for another loan, a bank loan or a car loan or whatever. If you've got a bad score, they're not going to give you a loan. The bank won't give you a loan because Equifax or Experian or TransUnion said you had a bad score. Or they might give you a loan with a higher interest rate. So to make these decisions, they have absolutely insane quantities of PII about everybody. And it's just this gold mine of PII for an attacker to go after. It resulted in the theft of 145 million U.S. consumers. There were some other smaller amounts of numbers from Canada and even the UK. Lots of forced retirements and firings. And this July, fine of up to 700 million. Although I don't think that they are actually going to pay that much. Here was and this is all out of the congressional reports on this. Here was the placement of the CSO. And a lot of different guys online, Krebs talked about this, but here is the CISO or the CSO, and where is this person, this position? It's under the chief legal officer. And apparently that is not as uncommon as I would have thought it would have been. I think he said, Krebs said like 20% of the respondents in a survey he did said that that's where their CISO was. But I think that is suboptimal. I think it could work successfully if you had good communication between everybody. Everyone was talking to each other. But in this case, everyone was not talking to each other. When the CEO got a briefing on cybersecurity the CISO didn't give the briefing. The lawyer did. And I have to wonder, did the lawyer take the cybersecurity stuff seriously? I mean, did the CISO prepare something and did he read it off, or would she try to say something like, and some of the stuff is like speculation because I don't exactly know, but if you read the congressional testimony, you'll kind of get your own ideas about how this was going on. Like, if she really wanted to tell the CEO that something was really bad, she wasn't allowed to like tell him herself. She had to go through the lawyer, and is her boss the lawyer, and is the lawyer filtering that or not? Or maybe since he's not an IT guy, maybe he's like, I don't really think this is serious. I'm not going to bug the CEO about this. I mean, you kind of don't really wonder how that was going on. Also, not very good communication between the CISO and the IT department, which she was supposed to be giving oversight for. So the system that was breached is this system that was created in the late 70s, and I can't imagine that it was on the system that was actually breached, but this ACIS automated consumer interview system. The system, the version of the system that was breached was created in the 93 to 94 timeframe. It was a bunch of Solaris boxes running Oracle. And I can imagine anybody who's into like pen testing would think that is a very juicy target. And I also think is an extremely juicy target because you've got all this middleware, Java, Oracle, these bash and corn scripts flowing back and forth to get this thing running, and with, on the front end, Apache struts. So there's probably all kinds of juicy things to poke at in there. And this was directly connected to the internet, and I could find no reference of it ever being pen tested or audited. And they made, in the congressional testimony, it kind of made it clear that the upper level management did not understand how this system works because it was so old. And it was only still running because they had some of these super old dudes still, original developers still working on it. And that like absolutely would freak me out. That they got these like single points of failure, that these guys could have been like 70 plus years old. I mean, they could have retired at any time or something could happen to them. So this is potentially a motivational quote here. So those of you who know Chris Nickerson, probably a lot of you do. He's potentially quoting a guy named Vince Lombardi, which was a famous American football coach who was famous for his motivational quotes. I thought this was a great quote here, but I couldn't actually find it anywhere. And I think maybe somebody made it up, but it sounds like something Lombardi would have said. But the point is that if you're really good at the basics, you're going to be successful. And I think you'll find when we go over these issues that Equifax was not good at the basics. So the areas that I want to go through with the framework are the first four. The identify, when you say identify, what is on your network? What is the scope of your network, the IP ranges? What kind of hardware and software is on your network? Who owns this stuff? If something needs to be taken offline or patched, who is it that you're going to? If you don't know what's on your network, you're going to have a harder time defending it. For instance, and we'll get to this, but they didn't know they had struts on their network. They forgot for this event. The vulnerability was announced or discovered in March of 17, and they had just patched their strut stuff in January for a different vulnerability, and they forgot that they had struts. So got to protect your stuff, the whole defense in depth jazz, patches, all that type of stuff. If someone does make it past your protections, ideally you'd like to detect attempts as well, but certainly successful breaches or problems. And once you see something that happened, you detected some kind of event that happened, you would like to respond to it. There's been places, I had a customer and people in this room know exactly what I'm talking about, where we had a really strong detection game. And we would see attackers, these are red team guys, not like real guys, but we would see attackers coming in and doing stuff, and we would offer them mitigation advice on how to protect their network, and they wouldn't do it. So it's very frustrating. If you've got a really good detect thing, you see all the stuff going on, and then we try to get them to respond, and they wouldn't respond. We didn't have response control over their network. We were only doing the detect piece. So really all this stuff kind of like flows together. I'm not going to really get into the recover piece for this talk. According to the NIST, the recover is not the same recover I'm thinking of. When I think of recover, I think of like go re-image that workstation if it got compromised. They're not talking about that. So again, they identify what are your IP scopes, what hardware is on your network, what software is on your network, who owns this stuff, who is responsible for the care and feeding of it. Can your vulnerability scanner touch all these different subnets if you've got a big network? Is there something blocking your vulnerability scanner that would prevent you from doing it, letting it do its job and identify, the stuff that's on your network that may or may not be patched? Okay, lots of failures from Equifax on this. They did not have a consolidated software list that was accurate. The IT department and the security department had lists, but they were neither one was complete, and they didn't have everything covered. Their coverage did not extend entirely into their legacy network. This ACIS system was at a data center in Alpharetta, Georgia, and they did not have full coverage into this data center with their scanning stuff, with their scanning software. Manny was hired in response to the breach to respond to it and do an investigation and write a report. And they were seeing all these databases that were popped, and they couldn't figure out who owned them. And all these databases had all kinds of PII. I mean, it was all somebody at Equifax, but they couldn't figure out what department it was. Again, they had just seen the Struts vulnerability patched in 2017, and they forgot about it. And when they finally discovered the breach in July, and that the Struts had been breached, they were surprised because they didn't think that they had it. So protect this stuff. You've seen it a million times, but I think, and a lot of people are like, they're bored by it or whatever, and it's not exciting, it's not sexy, but it will absolutely save your bacon. If you have a good defense in depth, over and over again, I see an attack will get through one piece, but something else will stop it. Like it gets through the SMTP security gateway, and maybe the endpoint catches it, or it gets past everything, and then it finally gets caught on the going out at the proxy, or the IPS will stop it or something. So, really big fan of defense in depth. It's not just some buzzword. It absolutely works. The vulnerability management, I think there's another slide on this. We can talk more, but the patching was reactive at Equifax. The administrators would not patch anything unless the security department told them to patch it. So there was no proactiveness. The administrators were not signing up for the vulnerability mailing list from Struts or whatever product that they were responsible for. Other simple stuff you hear all the time, like plain text passwords. They found those shortly after they exploited Struts. They found them on the system, on the internet-facing system, passwords to all these other databases that were exploited. Databases that the system didn't need to talk to. So that's like a least privilege and a network segmentation issue. Here is this cool setup that they had, which didn't work, which I mean, if it did work, it would be pretty neat, I mean, so internet, border, gateway router, and then SSL visibility appliance, which I hadn't actually heard of. I've heard of other terms before, but not that exact term. IPS and IDS. And then this ACIS system here. Their certificates for this visibility appliance had expired, and depending on which report you read, between 6 months and a year. So they had no visibility to see what was going on, this traffic inside and out of the encrypted traffic inside and outside of this database, with all this PII on it. No mention. I mean, I assume that there was a firewall in here somewhere, but that's not mentioned. And a WAF was also not mentioned, which probably wouldn't have worked if the certs were expired, but would have been nice to have that in there. So ineffective patching. We went over that. Plain text passwords, no WAF. The IPS was blind. It couldn't do its prevention piece because it couldn't see inside the encrypted traffic. No network segmentation. The databases were also unencrypted. There were just so many problems you see over and over and over again. It just wasn't just one thing. I should have said this at the start. Like I thought that a lot of you might have thought that this was all caused because of a missing patch, but it was way more than that. Even if that thing was patched, there were so many other issues. There's chances if someone was actually determined, they could have gotten in anyways. So I have some of my pen testers and former pen testers in the room, but they don't have to answer this question. They're going to. So if you were going to run a vulnerability assessment or a pen test on an internet-facing application, when do you think would be the right time to run it? Before it's put into production, after it's put into production, after it's been compromised, or after it has been decommissioned? Anybody? But I will say that I don't know if it's like that over here, but in America, the common saying is if you're taking a multiple choice question and you don't know the answer, you should always pick C. So, my thing didn't work. So it was C. So they did a pen test on the application after they compromised it, and they found out it was vulnerable to SQL injection and like a bunch of other things. And then they decided to take it offline. So ineffective vulnerability scanning, they scanned on multiple different tools, but they couldn't find it. And I'm not sure if this was because their tools weren't configured properly or they had poor visibility. All the same, the attackers were able to find this. And I don't know if, from what direction were they scanning? Were they scanning for these vulnerabilities internally, or were they scanning from an external instance? The attackers found these vulnerable systems. I mentioned the patching policy. The IT department didn't patch anything unless the security department told them to patch it. But the security department did tell them to patch struts if they had it. But the email went out to like 300 people, but it didn't go out to the guy who was responsible for patching the struts instance. They had an internal audit that discussed their patch management system, and they were told the audit urged them to change to a proactive model, but they did not do so. So just like you have defense in depth, I'm a believer in detection and logging in depth for all of your witness devices. All these items should hopefully be going into your SIEM and normalized so you can make sense of all this stuff. And if you're not sure if you got a SIEM, you've got these logs, you're not sure where to start, really advise you to look at MITRE ATT&CK. Had great luck with MITRE ATT&CK and the detection piece. So the attack that sucked all the PI out started in May. But another attacker got in on the 10th of March. Now, this could have been the same people that came back in May, but we don't know. Someone came in, popped the system, and ran who am I, and just left. So I don't know what they were doing. It could have been the same guys, may not have been the same guys. There was nothing monitoring the key integrity of the files. Where all the web shells were inserted, they could have used, I know they're like, oh, this is an old system, it's legacy, we didn't want to touch it. But they could have used Tripwire. I mean, that's a 90s era product. They could have written a bash script or a Python script to run an MD5 hash on these files every night. There's like simple, super easy stuff they could have found to see if, to detect that piece of the intrusion. They had over 300 TLS SSL certificates expire in 2016. They were monitoring their perimeter stuff, not just this system, other systems. So they had a massive problem with that. And so they could not detect these things. Even if they couldn't see it, if they were looking at their network logs, they could have seen, if they had bothered to look at their network logs, maybe someone would have asked the question, why is all this outbound traffic going to China when all the data was getting sucked down? So, and finally, and they had this long-term, super slow-moving project to update their SSL, all their certs on their visibility appliance. They installed it on the 29th, and they looked at the logs. They immediately saw outbound traffic, and they blocked that one. They blocked the network, not just the IP, the network that it was coming from. On the next day, they saw another piece of another more traffic going to a German IP address. There was also, at least, we had a Chinese connection to it. Then they ran the pen test and found out it was vulnerable to SQL injection and all this other stuff. And then they decided, interesting piece here. Working for the Army, we always have who has the authority to order this or who has the authority to order that thing. My possessed computer. They didn't really, I didn't see that they asked anybody that the lower level guys to disconnect this system. They just did it. I'm like, well, at least someone showed some leadership here and disconnected the system after it was compromised. They hired Mandiant to look into the breach, and based on the results, over 45 million consumer data was leaked. So the conclusion of the breach is it really wasn't a priority for Equifax. They had said that it was a priority, security, but it wasn't. There were audits beforehand besides the internal patch audit that told them they had lots of problems. They didn't, obviously they didn't take it seriously enough, all the potential issues that they could have. In this one instance, I'm very happy to see that a lot of the people in charge that were responsible for this lost their jobs, because that's what they should, because in my opinion that they were negligent. Big fine. The competitors, this was in the Senate report because there were two really good reports from the House and one from the Senate. They noted that the competitors were also using struts, but they did not get hacked. So there was a lot of fallout in this from this org chart, this original org chart. Does anybody want to guess who didn't get fired or forced retirement? Legal. Who knows who had a CYA more than anybody else? The lawyers. So the first people to go were David, the CIO, and the CISO. They got a forced retirement. The next guy was the CEO himself, and the only guy that got fired was this guy. I'm not really sure if he was more guilty than anybody else, but he got the axe. Not on the slide. They're like, oh, no problem. We got a new CIO we're going to bring in. They're going to bring this new guy in. But he was involved in the recovery efforts, and he got popped for insider trading. So he pled guilty and had to go to jail for that. So they couldn't have him be the CIO because he dumped a bunch of his stock before it was publicly announced that they had a breach. So a little bit of discussion or questions. Where do you think the CISO role should be? Does anybody have an opinion on this? The optimal? Right under the CEO? That would be my preferred placement. If you're under the CIO, then the CIO, you're beholden to the CIO, and you're like grading him, but you're grading the guy that rates you. So there's kind of a conflict of interest there. I was in a position at another job where I fell directly under the CISO, and he was trying to get me to falsify a compliance report to our higher headquarters, and I wouldn't do it. But I don't like my boss trying to get me to lie for him. So I think really reporting to CEO is the best solution. I think depending on the situation, maybe any one of these positions could actually work. But I like reporting directly to CEO the best, because then if there's a problem and you think he needs to know about it, there's nothing stopping you from talking to him about it. So there was a lot of kind of nasty things said about the CISO. She had a degree in music, and there was no record of her having any kind of professional security certifications. So does anybody have an opinion on should the CISO have an IT degree or specifically a cybersecurity degree, or should they have certifications like CSSP or CISM or any of that jazz, or does it really matter? So point of note, just not beating up on her. The CIO had a degree, an undergraduate degree in Russian and an MBA. So he didn't have specifically, I mean, I don't know what kind of certs he had, but does anybody have an opinion on what a CISO should have education and certification wise? What?
Like most of the other roles in security, I don't think it really matters as long as they know what they are actually doing and they understand the more important concepts or the skills that they need, for example, to master stuff like risk assessment and proper business dealing with security and all those politics and stuff like that. As long as they do have those skills and they can prove with some kind of track record or even through assessments or whatever, it shouldn't matter what university degree or security certification they have. It's just like an add-on in a sense. For example, if you have CIS, okay, sure, nice. It might increase your chances a little bit, but if you don't have it, it wouldn't kill your chances either. It's more about your skills, I think, and your knowledge.
Thank you. That really sounds good. I think all this stuff, the IT degree, all the certs, they can assist, but you really need the right person in the role. Obviously, if you're in a management position, I think good managerial mindset, a good leader is important, but you really got to have the security mindset and take stuff seriously. So we kind of went over this in the last talk. This was gone over. But my question, I will have one piece out of this. What is the oldest something that you took action on that you found in the logs and actually took action on? Anybody found something that they were told to find like over a year ago and actually took action on it? No one looked at their old logs, had to get someone told them that nothing? No one's looking at their old logs. I mean, just because you? How old was it? Yeah. So it helped you? Okay. So was that just for an internal investigation, or was that like for a law enforcement investigation or something?
What's the second one?
What was it? Was this in response to just an internal inquiry or investigation, or like a law enforcement investigation?
For internal investigation.
For internal. So, but it did help you.
Yeah. Certainly.
Okay. Anybody else? Normally, I'm not really thinking we're fine. We're generally about 6 months back is what I'm seeing. Every once in a while, we'll get a request for something older, but normally it doesn't go past 6 months for us. Oh, I was supposed to hide this. Wrap up. Okay, so a little bit to try to take away from this talk. I hope you got that. I hope you found the Equifax stuff interesting. The congressional reports are really good. You can use all their mistakes. Try to use all their mistakes to your advantage. Try not to make the same mistakes they did, and use these points. Use these points to try to, if you're trying to get something fixed in your organization and you're not getting any traction, maybe you can do use Equifax as a poster child, as an example to try to get leverage to make something happen. And if your leadership is not interested, they're still not interested, you can remind them of everyone that was fired or forced retirement from to make them know that they are not immune to, just because they're a C-suite person, not immune to being fired. Also, have a gander at the NIST CyberSecurity framework. If you haven't done it already, you can just look at that one piece and like, what do these different areas mean to me? There's all kinds of stuff if you dive into it. It's actually not really hard to read. I quite like it. And again, like a lot of other people, I mean, there's the MITRE ATT&CK workshops right here too. That's really good stuff. If you haven't looked at it already, check out MITRE ATT&CK. You can really, really, really improve your detect game with it. It's helped us a lot. Lots of references in the end here. And any end questions? 10 minutes. Oh, I went way too fast. Any questions? Comments? Have at it.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the graph with the organizational overview, which is quite interesting. I know a lot of friends in different corporations which are CISOs under the IT department, and this basically leads to IT security being a dumpster fire.
Absolutely.
So an interesting fact about the lawyers being before the CEO or the board. An interesting detail is that as soon as the board knows about major violations, they are partly liable with private equity. So there is in many corporations this concept that lower management is not allowed to talk to the board directly, but have to go through briefings with lawyers. And they kind of do some filtering on what you're allowed to say to the board. Otherwise, they could be liable with private equity. So from the side of the CEO, this kind of makes sense to have the lawyers before the CISO. So they don't get too much information, so they don't get liable with private equity. Fun fact.
Okay, I hadn't heard of that. It's an interesting fact.
It has to be like a major violation, and if they're aware of it and don't act on it on something like that, this can really happen. Like, these are special cases, but they often have lawyers in between those conversations which brief you. And also a fun fact about the congressional hearing. I was hearing it. I saw that the stream, and one of those competitors basically was a reseller of Equifax. So short after the breach, their stock went down a little bit, but soon after, all customers gone to the different competitors, and in turn, the stock of Equifax even raised. I think they even made money on this.
Yeah, they could have. I think they should have been hit a lot harder than they were. But at least all those the C-suite people got hit. I mean, at least, because a lot of times you hear about these big disasters that happen, and there's no one held responsible at all. So at least something happened.
Early retirement means that you get a shitload of money before you leave. So I'm not sure if it's something good or bad happened to you if you're in that position.
I think that early retirement was contingent upon how much the board liked the congressional testimony. If you read the testimony, it's very interesting, and I do not have a favorable opinion of that CISO based on the stuff she was saying. Oh, it's not really important to keep logs. It doesn't really matter, and not really matter that we didn't know it was on our network. That really wouldn't have helped us. I'm like, I don't know if the lawyers told her to say this or she truly believed it herself, but.
Anyways, thank you.
Oh, thank you. What else?
I'm very glad that you mentioned the NIST CyberSecurity framework. I know it's a bit new for now, but have you seen more implementations of it in your work? More people are trying to implement it, because when you try to, for example, to look for examples, there are very specific use cases, like Siemens, for example, that implemented the entire framework and went through it. So have you seen some, like, in real life while working or consulting, more people who applied the framework all together and got some results or positive results from it?
I've only seen what we've done with it, and there's a regulation that I can throw in here because I work for the U.S. Army CERT, so I'm not going around consulting with people. I mean, I talk to people at conferences, but we have some documentation. The DoD manuals, a lot of their regulations and stuff, they highly reference the NIST stuff. Our doctrine from ours has similar to the framework. They call some of the areas differently, and sometimes they have double things in these sections. But the current one we're using is from like 2012, and I actually prefer the NIST one because it's newer and it's actually clearer. I really started looking into this like a year and a half ago, because the red team was like running circles around us, and I was fed up with it. And a lot of people or my colleagues were fed up with it, and we got a bunch of people together and figured out how we could prevent the red team from owning us. And that's when we relied heavily on protect, detect, and respond. We went through all kinds of, had our guys look and see, how was the red team breaking in, and tailored mitigations to each one. Sometimes people didn't want to cooperate, but we managed to get a lot of different mitigations in. That's under the protect piece. Under the detect, we relied heavily on MITRE ATT&CK. And for response, we like to go down to the lowest level for putting isolation actions in place. So we were, so like the guy at 2 a.m, if he sees something going on a workstation, he has the authority to isolate it. He doesn't have to ask permission from anybody to isolate it. You can always unisolate it. I mean, but we want to quarantine a box. So that helped us. I wasn't specifically looking at each, you can look at the NIST document. I don't know if it's 70, 100 pages, and I encourage you to check it out if you can make it through all the fine print. I really was looking at broad pieces, like, the broad pieces I kind of went over.
Any other questions? Nope, then thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.